Chapter 3, Trouble in Paradise. A/N, okay. So by title alone you all know that something is happening with Naruto and his small group within the Isles. Last chapter he saved a little girl from a bunch of grown men, spent the day with said little girl's mother figure/adopted mother. And he got to know a little more about said woman. Also, I have decided that with the change I'm going through with Naruto's character, instead of it being an emotionless husk like Ulquiorra, he'll be acting like more of a serious version of his canon self as more members of his peerage is collected. But the change is the theme song for the story. No longer will it be Alonce by Aqua Times. Now the opening is Ranbu no Melody, my personal favorite of the Bleach openings. And also, we will see the fallout between Rias and Grafia, and even some form of fallout between Rias and her peerage Bar Issei. This chapter will have some things, but more or less it's a chilled chapter with action. And I noticed that I screwed up with Naruto's eyes. The slit pupil is in his green eye, and green tear tattoo is underneath his left eye. His green eye, not his blue. Also, some of you may be confused as to why velvet. Well, the answer is Miyuki. The proper reason I came up with will be made known in the chapter. But basically, as Miyuki was basically raised by Velvet, her innocence rubbed off on Velvet, making her more friendly. But still not someone to be messed with. Now let's get right into this. Velvet disclaimer, please. And yes, I will be having different people with the disclaimer. Velvet, why do I have to do this? A/N, one of my favorite characters. Just do it. Velvet, fine. Dimpdanterox doesn't own anything in regards to what he writes. He only owns the games and nothing more. A/N, thanks, now then. Theme music. Ranbu no Melody. Start, Kuo, Japan/Naruto's old house, 1 week after his departure for the Isles. Ophis had just woken up from yet another long sleep she had. Looking around, she remembered that Naruto was out of the country trying to form his own peerage. Looking to her right and seeing that the bed had a large lump in it, an annoyed look came onto her face, something that was rare for her as she never showed emotions unless Naruto was with her. Pulling the blanket, she saw the naked body of Akino laying there as she held onto something tightly. Placing a hand on the girl's shoulder, Ophis gave her a light push that sent her off the bed and onto the ground. Akino screamed as she fell to the ground, making Ophis let out a small smile at her work, before she shot up to her feet and glared at said former Infinite Lowly. "What was that for?" she asked, angry. "You were in my bed, I don't remember letting you in. And only Naruto can sleep next to me," Ophis told her as she crawled towards Akino and stopped at the end of the bed. Looking down, Ophis saw something that irked her. Laying on the ground was a dakimakura that looked hand-stitched. On it was her blonde interest in a pose that most women would consider amazing as his slightly wet hair stuck to his face, his impassive gaze locked upwards. His clothes messy and slightly see-through as well. His pants being pulled down slightly on one side. Looking back up to the teen, she stared boredly into her eyes and asked, "What is this exactly?" "It's the dakimakura of the person I love. It helps me sleep," Akino asked plainly as she stared at Ophis with annoyance. "Okay, but why is Naruto on it?" Ophis asked, feeling annoyed. "Oh, because I couldn't take it. For as long as I known him, he never turned his eyes to me in any sort of romantic light. I made this as a little taste of what I will have in the future," Akino said with emphasis on the word will. "Oh, you really believe that you can make him fall for you?" Ophis asked, smiling. "Of course. I've known Naruto since he first became a devil. I always tried my best to look after him, and I am going to be the one who shows him what true love between two lovers is," Akino declared with a determined smile as Ophis stared on. "Not if I get to him first, little girl," Ophis thought to herself before she remembered something. Girl, how is your peerage faring with the sudden loss of him? Ophis asked. Not too good. Ever since he left, we've been divided. Akino said, looking to the ground and picking up her dakimakura and holding it closely. That I could tell easily. But how badly? Ophis asked again. Well, whenever Ria says something or tries to order me to tell her about Naruto, I just tell her that it's something that's no longer her problem. She had her chance, but she blew it all on the idiot. Speaking of which, even after the fight, he thinks Naruto left due to him not wanting to be in, as Issei puts it. Amazing %, she said, using air quotes. And what about the other three? Ophis asked. Kaneko worries me a little. She can't stand Rias and Issei and goes out of her way to ignore them whenever they ask her for something. Though I have a feeling if the idiot badmouths Naruto again, Kaneko is gonna break what makes him a man. And with Kiba, he's following in Kaneko's footsteps and ignoring them, making them feel what Naruto felt. And Asia, she's still her usual self and is trying to make some peace with them. Akino explained as she let out a loud sigh. So Red is angry at the fact she lost Naruto. And it's messing with all of you as well. Ophis simplified as she moved to sit next to the girl. Pretty much, and to be honest, not having him around is affecting me as well. She said sadly as Ophis looked confused. What do you mean? Ophis asked. Well, back before everything happened, I was the closest to Naruto. I stayed with him more times than I could count. Without him around, it's like I can't fully wake up. Akino complained. Kinda like a rechargeable battery. Ophis said as Akino smiled. Exactly. That's why I have the dakimakura, but it's just not the same. She said sadly. It may take a month or two, but Naruto will return. He is just gathering his own peerage. People who he can protect from falling into despair. Ophis explained, making Akino smile. You really believe in him? Akino stated with a smile. Of course. When has Naruto ever let us down? Ophis said as Akino suddenly had an idea. Are you able to view Naruto without traveling anywhere? Akino asked. Yes. It's quite easy for me. Ophis replied to the teen. Could you show me how he is? I want to see how he's doing. Akino explained as Ophis could see how the girl felt about the blonde. Nodding to the girl, Ophis raised her hand in front of her. Both of them watched in silence as a small ripple appeared before it showed Naruto walking around the town of Abel. His clothing was something that Akino never expected to see the usually stoic and emotionless boy to wear. He had a white singlet with a red spiral over his heart. On top of that was an orange jacket that stopped at the bottom of his ribs. On the sleeves of the jacket was the same spiral in the same color. He had on a pair of gray baggy track pants with blue boots to top off the get-up. Future Trunks clothing, Android Saga. Recolored, they saw him leading a small girl around as a small smile was etched onto his face. Akino, knowing the smile as one Naruto's true smile, could do nothing but give her own. He looks happy, she stated as Ophis turned to her. Closing the ripple, Ophis turned to the girl as she stood to her feet and moved to get dressed. What's your name, girl? She asked. Akino Himejima. Akino replied as she turned to Ophis. And you're the dragon god of infinity, Ophis. That's correct. Now Akino, how about we talk about something? Ophis suggested as Akino raised a brow. And what would that be? Akino asked as a smile appeared on Ophis's face. A little agreement for our favorite blonde, was all she said before she had Akino's full attention. I'm in. She agreed instantly. Good. Ophis said simply. Grimmery Estate. Grafia was currently walking around the estate making sure she had cleaned all the rooms and done all of her jobs for the day. Once she was finished, she decided to pay Serzex a visit. Teleporting to where her king would be, she found him behind his desk filling out some papers. She stood there for a few minutes before Xerxes lifted his head away from his work and noticed her. "Graphia-chan, how is my queen doing?" he asked happily as a smile came onto the woman's face. "I am doing well. So far, I haven't heard anything in regards to how Naruto is doing in Berseria. So I can only imagine he's doing perfectly fine," she replied. "That's good. And anything in regards to her?" he asked as Graphia's smile disappeared. "She contacted me 2 days after he left," she said as Xerxes let out a sigh. "And?" he asked again. Graphia sighed before she went on to explain as to how Rias had been upset at the fact she was tricked. Flashback. Graphia had just finished her daily duties before she felt a familiar energy signature appear behind her. Knowing what it was about, she dusted off her clothes before she turned around and saw a very angry and upset Rias standing there. "Good afternoon, Rias-sama," she said, offering the young heiress a small bow. "How dare you?" Rias asked as Graphia stared at her in confusion. "How dare I?" Graphia asked, confused, as Rias walked towards her. "You took him away from me. He had saved me from my nightmare. And you came and took him away," she said as Graphia could only sigh. "Rias-sama, I did nothing of the sort. If I hadn't made you sign the trade agreement, then Naruto would have most likely left, as he didn't want to have to deal with anything you would have put him through. He had already been ignored by you for long enough. If he had have stayed as a member of your peerage, then there is a high chance that he would have gone stray, and we would have had to deal with a young and powerful devil," Graphia explained as she stared Rias in the eye. "No, I would have showed him how I truly felt," she said, only for Graphia's look to harden. "How you really felt? Do you actually think that he would just accept the fact that you had suddenly changed and actually returned the feelings that he had?" she asked rhetorically as Rias could only glare at her. "He cared about me," she said, not seeing that she was in the wrong. "He used to care about you. But those feelings started dimming the more you ignored him for the filthy pervert. You were drawn to the pervert as his powers weren't hidden away behind a proper lock like Naruto's. The pervert's power could be shown whenever. But not Naruto's. He had to suffer more than he ever had before. It was only after that you started to notice him. But once you did, it was too late. He had already moved on and didn't need you. I took him under my wing, as my queen, as I know that he wouldn't take being a member of your peerage anymore," she continued as Rias backed away. "You're saying all I cared about was his power? That's nothing but a lie," she denied as Graphia scoffed. "Then where were you when he needed you? When he wanted to confess to you, what were you doing? You were too busy trying to give yourself to the perv just to get out of your engagement. After all that, can you really say that he would accept anything you had to say? Trust me on this, Rias, as his new king. I know that Naruto would not be happy serving under a king like you," Graphia said as she turned to walk away. After all, with how his life was growing up, he would rather be around those that he can trust. Those who can help break his curse. Goodbye, Rias-sama. Think over the mistakes you have made. With those last words, Graphia left, leaving Rias angry to disappear as she realized that everything that was said was true. Yet she was also curious about this curse. Flashback end. Don't worry, this isn't the end. Rias won't drop the subject easily. Well then. I guess I couldn't expect much. We always spoiled Rias, so when we took away Naruto, it was like we were denying her something," Xerxes said before he saw a small magic circle appear on his desk. The two watched as a hologram of Naruto appeared from the circle. He bowed to the two devils in front of him. "Lucifer-sama. Graphia-sama," he said. "Ah, young Naruto, welcome. We were just wondering how you were doing. I must say I like your clothing choice. Surzek said as Naruto had taken off his jacket and was now reporting in his singlet. Thank you, Surzek-sama. I am getting in contact with you because I need help with something here in the Isles, he said, causing Grafia to become suspicious and a little worried. Is there a problem? She asked as Naruto turned to his king. Not in the way you were thinking. After discussing this with Ravel, we were both thinking of properly moving to the Isles and making it our home and base of operations. We both enjoy it here, he explained. Does Ravel know what your true intentions are? She asked as Naruto nodded, folding his arms. She knows that I am doing this as a way to be away from her. She supports me in the decision, he said before letting out a small laugh as a smile was on his face. I really must thank Lady Phoenix the next I see her for giving me such a wonderful girl to be my first piece, he laughed again. Naruto-kun. Once your time is up in Berseria, if you decide that you will be living in Berseria, how will you attend Kuo to keep up your studies? Surzek asked as Grafia stared on interested. My Garganta will get me to Kuo easily. And don't worry, the only reason that I would originally appear 2 hours later was because I couldn't properly use it. After awakening my sacred gear properly, I found that when I used it, I would come out on the other side at the exact time I left, he explained as they watched him turn and look behind him. I'm sorry, but we must cut this short. Naruto apologized. Lucifer-sama, will you lend me some people to help build a house for me and my peerage? He asked as he turned to the red-haired Mao. We'll see, Naruto-kun. You just go have fun on your vacation, he said before the door his office opened. The occupants turned to see Rias there, glaring at the silver-haired maid who only gave an stoic gaze in return. Surzek smiled before his gaze wandered to Naruto, who looked back to him and gave him a nod. Naruto bowed as Rias's gaze turned to him. Lucifer-sama, Grafia-sama. I hope you two have a good time. I must leave, my potential queen and someone important to me are calling me, he said before he heard Rias call his name. Naruto. Please forgive me. Come back and be my knight. Please. She begged as Naruto's back was to her. That request, he said, trailing off, giving some hope to the girl, is something that I cannot grant, he finished as the girl was shocked as her hope was shattered. Why? She asked, looking at the ground. Rias Grimmery. My life has been filled with despair since the moment I was born. I would have parts of my life where I was able to find what I believed was what I deserved after all I've been through. But that was nothing but a foolish ideal held by someone who was an utter fool. As such, what you did to me is but another addition to my ever-growing despair, making my ever-longing wait that much longer. Farewell. Rias. He finished as the hologram disappeared. Rias's gaze was stuck to the ground as his words bounced around in her head. All this time, she started. He's been waiting for something that he could see as the end. The thing that ends despair's long grip on his life and make him feel happier about himself. To make him realize that he doesn't have to suffer within despair. And like everyone else, he too can have happiness. Grafia finished as she bowed to her king. I'll take my leave, she said before disappearing. Surzek could only watch as Rias turned around and walked out of his office. He could see that she was still reeling from the fact that Naruto had originally seen her as the way to break his despair, only for her to screw it up. Feeling sorry for her, he stayed where he was, head in his hands as he let out a heavy sigh. Hopefully, this will allow you to grow more as a King Rias. To not make the same mistake, and hopefully, you can learn how to handle things when they reach the end, he said before getting back to work. Good luck with your life from now on, Naruto. Knowing your supposed luck from what Grafia has told me, your happiness could be ended within an instant. A positive for the negative, he thought to himself. But, you're a strong kid. You can bounce back from anything, he thought before he went back to work. I hope Millikas can grow to be as strong as you, were his last thoughts before he drowned himself in paperwork. With Naruto. After saying what he did to Rias and cutting the connection, Naruto was standing around in an empty room of his house. Currently he was staring at the ground before he opened up a garganta. Walking through, he ignored as Ravel called to him as Velvet looked on from behind her, curious as to the reason he would just suddenly leave. Looking at the younger girl in front of her, she placed a hand on her shoulder as Ravel turned to her. Walking to the lounge with the younger girl following her. They both sat down on chairs as Miyuki walked in and looked around in search for Naruto. "What's wrong with Naruto?" she asked. Guessing from how he acted, he had to deal with her. Ravel answered as she looked Velvet in the eye. "Her?" Velvet asked, confused as she wondered who Ravel was referring to. Naruto-kun's previous king before he took on the placement of queen under the Devil Grafia Lucifuge. Ravel said. She went to continue only for Velvet to interrupt her. "Explain who Grafia is later, Naruto and her first." Velvet demanded as Ravel nodded. "Right. As I was saying, Naruto-kun was formerly a knight under the heiress of the Gremory clan, Rias Gremory. From what I can gather, he wasn't treated the way some people believe the Gremory treated their peerage. So whenever he interacts with her, he seems to be put into a bad mood. Guess he won't be letting go of the grudge," she said as Velvet thought on what she was told. "And now, with his own peerage, he plans on making sure no one ever feels the same thing he did?" she asked as Ravel shrugged. "I wouldn't know. I've only been Naruto-kun's bishop for a week now. We really haven't bonded much besides what we've done here," she explained as Velvet brought her hand to her chin and thought. "From what I've seen so far, Naruto tries to make those around him happy," she said as Ravel nodded. "The fact he has been trying to keep Miyuki as happy as possible for the short time he has been here tells me that with how Naruto is acting, he wants people to never experience what he feels. I also gathered that he has been scouting me. But I have 2 questions," she finished as she stared at the blonde girl. "Ask away and I'll try and answer all of them," Ravel said as Velvet stared her in the eye. "First of all, what piece am I being scouted for?" she said as Ravel released a sigh. "How it is so far. You are going to be the queen of Naruto-kun's peerage," she said as shock appeared on Velvet's face. "Why the queen?" she asked shocked. "Naruto-kun has seen that you are determined in your quest for revenge." She paused as Velvet went to say something only for Ravel to stop her. "He has explained to me that about what happened. Being a member of his peerage, he doesn't want his own peerage to have secrets between its members. Back to the fact of why he wants you to be the queen. Naruto also needs someone to help him run the peerage. While I can gladly help him with that, I can tell he doesn't want to trouble with every little matter," she continued as Velvet nodded. "Okay then," she said simply. "Not only that, but Miyuki is also a huge factor to his decision," Ravel said looking towards the small girl who was using crayons to draw a picture. "Miyu-chan is a factor to me becoming his queen?" "How?" she asked. "Naruto-kun had told me this a couple days ago. He enjoys the company of the 2 of you. He's grown quite attached to Miyuki," she said smiling. "From the little bit of his past that he has told me, he never got to experience the feeling of a family. And I think, seeing how you and Miyuki are, he wants to make sure that she will have the family that he never got. So if you became his queen, then the 2 of you together could truly be a proper family to Miyuki," she finished as Miyuki's voice caught their attention. "Hello, Mr. Fox, why are you here?" she said as they saw a fox sitting on the table sitting in front of the little girl as it stared at her. The orange-furred fox stared at her before moving towards her. She raised her hand and petted the animal on his head. The fox leaned into her touch before he moved into the girl's lap and started licking the bottom of her chin. The little girl laughed as Velvet moved over to her. The fox turned his head to her as the blood-red eyes he had stared into her golden ones. The long ears that resembled a rabbit's more than a fox's had perked up more as he caught a scent on her. They watched as he moved over to her before he sniffed her some more. Velvet crouched down as the fox started making a yipping sound. Placing her human hand out, the fox opened his maw and lightly bit down, not enough to break the skin, but only enough as he started to pull her towards the door. Picking the fox up and holding him in one hand, she turned to Ravel, who had stood up and moved over to Miyuki. "Can you please look after her?" she asked as Ravel nodded. "Don't worry. I'll keep her safe," Ravel said as Miyuki looked up to her worried. "Mama, what's going on?" she asked as Velvet smiled. "I'm just gonna go find Naruto-san. That's all," she said as the fox yipped again. "Okay then. Go find Papa and bring him back," she said, smiling with her eyes closed, missing the blush that appeared on Velvet's face. Walking out of the house quickly, Velvet started to run into the forest, following the direction in which the fox was taking her by pointing its tail. Meanwhile, what Miyuki has just said had just clicked inside Ravel's head. She turned to the young girl quickly, a shocked expression clearly on her face. "Did you just call Naruto-kun, Papa?" she asked, pausing to make sure. She got a large smile and a nod in return. "Yep. Papa has been doing the same thing Mama has, and he's only known me for a week. For that, and for how Mama seems to like him, I could only think that Papa is a good thing to call him," she said, smiling. She grabbed the drawing that she was currently working on and showed it to Ravel. She saw that it was a normal drawing that a child would normally make. On it was 4 people. She saw 2 people standing on the left side with blonde hair. She looked over the drawing before she looked back at the young girl. Looking over to the right side, she saw another person that had long black hair and a red-colored arm. In between the taller blonde and the black hair woman was a drawing of a little girl with black hair. On the piece of paper at the top, she saw the words, "My family. Is this how you see your family? Who is this next to Naruto?" she asked as Miyuki pointed to the people. "That's you," she said, pointing to the shorter blonde. "Why am I here?" she asked, surprised. "Because I see you as my big sister," Miyuki said as Ravel's eyes widened. Ravel couldn't hold herself as she wrapped her arms around Miyuki and pulled her into a tight hug. Miyuki simply giggled before returning the hug as the Ravel was laughing slightly. "I'm finally an older sister," she yelled in happiness as she pulled away. With Velvet, she was currently walking around the dense forests on the outskirts of town, the orange-furred fox pointing her in the direction of the person she was looking for. She eventually came to a large cliff where the waves below constantly crashed into it, spraying it upwards. Looking around as the fox that was on her shoulder did the same, she eventually saw a small pillar of smoke rising to her right. Looking to the fox on her shoulder, she turned back to the pillar as she walked off in the direction of the smoke. After wandering for about 10 minutes, she eventually came to a destroyed clearing. Looking around, she eventually found Naruto, who was trying to gather energy into his right hand. She watched as a black orb had formed into his hand. Running towards a tree, she watched as he slammed his hand into the tree with the energy dispersing. She watched as he stepped away before he formed a green javelin in his right hand and cut the tree down in annoyance. The spear disappeared as she started to walk towards him. She watched as he turned to her. She stopped slightly as Naruto's eyes had changed from the normal sapphire blue right eye and his emerald green left eye to a golden color on a black background. He let out a sigh as his eyes turned back to their normal color. What are you doing out here, Velvet-san? He asked as she gave him a cocky smile. Looking for you. Didn't expect to see you just leave like that. You looked like a kid who was throwing a tantrum. She mocked as Naruto closed his eyes and scoffed. I just had to blow out some steam, that's all. He said with a smile as she raised a brow. Because of your former king, right? She asked as Naruto's eyes widened. How did you dash? He was cut off by the woman in front of him. Revel told me. She explained what she knew of your past. She told him as Naruto shook his head. That's my bishop and manager for you. He said, chuckling lightly. Making sure that we are set for the future. She said as Naruto looked her in the eye questionably. What do you mean we? He asked as Velvet walked over to a fallen log and sat down. He followed and sat down next to her as the fox on her shoulder jumped off and moved over to Naruto. He turned his attention to the fox for a bit as he pet the animal, getting a happy yip in return. So that's how you were able to find me? He said as Velvet looked to the fox in his lap. Yeah. That little guy was the only way that I could find you. He led me right to you. She said as Naruto stared down at the fox in his lap. No matter what, you've always had my back. Ever since I found you. Isn't that right? Kurama? He asked as the fox just seemed to nod. Velvet looked at the two before Naruto turned back to her. So, you decided that you would join my peerage? Naruto asked as she nodded. Yes, I did. I'm joining to make sure you can keep yourself safe and for her. She said as Naruto nodded understandingly. Miyuki. I want her to remain safe. Not only her, but you as well. Since I came here, you've been nothing but helpful, and Miyuki has been a light in my relatively dark world. I want to keep her safe. So that she won't fall to my curse. He said as he looked to the ground. Your curse? Velvet asked, curious. It's something I believe is within my life. When I find something that I can see as my light, it always ends up being taken away from me. It's happened quite a few times. Now it's the source of my true power. I use the power of the despair I feel, in which I can channel it, and then I change. He said as entered his sacred gear form. So that's your power. She stated as she looked him in the eye. Emerald green eyes stared into golden as he turned his head away. Despair's Onslaught Murcielago. That is the name of my sacred gear. He explained as the form disappeared. With it, I have a lot of abilities that are useful, such as high-speed regeneration. He started as she looked intrigued. High-speed regeneration, huh? What can you heal with it? She asked as he smiled lightly. Just about anything. I focus my energy to the wound, and then it is simply gone within a second. Though there are two things that I can't regenerate. My brain and other vital organs. Should those be destroyed, I'm finished. He explained as Velvet laughed. So all we have to do is make sure that doesn't happen. Sounds easy enough. She joked as Naruto went on. Then, as you saw earlier, I can form orbs made of pure energy. Though, the difference is that I was trying to create a close-range attack. Usually, I simply gather the energy and then release it. I can form it into a ball and make it stronger depending on how much energy I use for it. When it is formed into a ball, it's called a zero. I can form it around my hand without making anyone take notice and release a much weaker version. The difference is that this attack travels more as a wave and faster than most people can track. It's called the bala. While not as strong as Zero, it can move a lot quicker. He said as Velvet had an idea. You said that you were trying to make a close-range attack using your Zero as a base for the attack, right? She asked as he nodded. Well, I might be able to help with that. She said, standing up. Oh yeah? And what should I be doing then? He asked as Velvet's demonic arm came out. Show me your Zero. Let me see the base of the attack. She ordered as she pointed to a tree. Not even my queen, and yet you're ordering around like I'm your husband or something. He joked, getting a blush from her. Shut up and do it already. She yelled as her cheeks were still colored a healthy red. Laughing to himself, he pointed his hand to the tree she pointed at. His energy formed in his hand as it formed a large orb. Zero. He said as the orb turned into a large beam and destroyed the tree with ease. Is that better? He asked as she saw the damage. Bringing her demonic arm up, she started gathering her own energy into the palm of her hand. Just watch this. It might help, she said as he stared at her open palm. He then saw as a small ball of energy was created. The energy inside seemed to be spinning around as it grew to the size of her entire hand. He watched as it seemed to hold its shape even while it continued to spin. This is my attack. Impulse Desire. She called it as she slammed the orb into the ground, causing a crater to form with cracks reaching up from the impact area. Now, explain that attack, she said as Naruto looked at her confused. Why? You know the attack, there isn't a reason for me to explain it, he said as she shook her head. If you explain it, you might figure out what you're missing with your attack, she said as he realized what she wanted him to do. Well, you formed the attack first by forcing your energy into your palm. He started as she nodded. And how was my energy moving? She asked with a smile. It was rotating wildly, he said as she nodded. Exactly. You want your attack to work so that it will work as a close-range attack, so that if you released it, there's less chance of hitting your friends. But what you were missing when you tried it earlier when I walked in was that you needed to use the rotation as a way to help the attack hold its shape, she explained as Naruto nodded slowly. By using the rotation to keep shape, you can focus on adding more power into the attack to make it stronger as well. And finally comes containment. Being able to hold the attack while it is rotating in that single shape alone will help with it staying as a ball for the attack completely. She finished as Naruto raised his hand up. So from what you're telling me, I realize that I already have the power and containment when it comes to the attack, but I'm too used to releasing it instead of holding it. That's the reason why they had dispersed earlier, he summarized as she nodded with her arms crossed over her chest. Exactly. Now, give it a try. This time, start with rotating your energy until it forms a small ball, then add in more power to increase the size, and finally, contain it into that size, she told him as she walked over to stand by him. She watched as his energy formed, as his eyes had changed into their golden color with a black background. His energy had formed in his hand. The problem was that he wasn't rotating it. He was simply holding it in his palm. She went to say something only to stop as she saw his eyes reverting back to their normal state. Looking back at the orb, she watched said black and green orb had started to peel away. The black and green color faded away completely to reveal a glowing blue orb in his hand. Though once he moved an inch, the orb exploded, sending him flying into a tree. She looked over to him as he pulled himself up and stood to his feet. What the hell happened just then? He asked as she sighed. You probably overloaded the attack just then, she guessed as he dusted himself off. Hey Naruto, she called, getting his attention. Yeah? He asked as she looked at him questioningly. Just before where you were trying to create that attack, your eyes were different. Why did your eyes change? She asked him. It's been happening while I've been training lately. Murcielago said it was because I had become more used to his power. He paused as he reached into a garganta and pulled out his sword. I'll experience some changes and my powers will spike. It's just my body reacting to the powers of my balance breaker. He finished as the sword disappeared in green flames. Okay then, she said as a smile appeared on his face. What, were you worried about me? He asked as she simply walked past him and grabbed his arm, her demonic arm having become bandaged once again as she walked them both back to the boys' house. Kurama, having been sitting on a rock, ran over to Velvet before he jumped onto her shoulder and made himself comfortable. She smiled at the fox and petted him softly as Naruto now walked by her side. He likes you, he said as she looked towards him. Well, I like him as well. Any canine animal really, she said as Naruto looked at her with a raised brow. Really? To be honest, you look like more of a cat person, he said as Velvet looked away. I like canines 'cause they don't abandon their masters. Though I'm also allergic to cats, she admitted, embarrassed. Hey, no need to be embarrassed about that. Everyone has something they're embarrassed about, he stated, snickering slightly as she turned to him with a glare. Even you? She asked, annoyed. I'm afraid of. He trailed off, mumbling his answer. I'm afraid of? Afraid of what? She asked, only for him to mumble his answer again. Getting annoyed quickly, she pointed her wrist blade at his stomach and asked slowly. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid of needles, okay, he shouted at her as she started laughing. He blushed in embarrassment as they continued their walk, Velvet's laughter calming down into quiet snickering. Naruto's home, Brasilia. 8 p.m. The two teens had both arrived back in the blonde's house and walked in to see a sight that brought a smile to the blonde's face. Gesturing to his companion to be quiet, he moved over to the couch where he saw Ravel and Miyuki asleep together, the younger girl having fallen asleep using the blonde girl's lap as a pillow. Velvet walked over before she picked the young girl up. She went to leave only for Naruto, who had Ravel under his arm, to stop her. Why don't you just stay here for the night? It'll be easier since I can reincarnate you before we go to sleep, he suggested as she nodded with a soft smile. She followed him as he stopped at Ravel's room and tucked his bishop into bed with the same smile that seemed to be stuck on his face for most of the day. Once that was done, he led Velvet to his bedroom. Once they reached his room, he opened the door and let her in. Velvet walked in and placed Miyuki down on the bed before she sat down next to the girl. Naruto smiled at her before his expression turned serious. You ready? He asked as she nodded. Just one request, she said as he looked confused. Once, I'm your queen, don't treat me like a slave. I am your queen, someone you can trust no matter what. She finished as he smiled before she laid down as the queen appeared in Naruto's hand. As my queen, my problems are your problems. As such, we can sort them out together, he said before placing the queen upon her chest. It's time. I'll ask you once more. Are you ready to become a devil and stand by my side? He asked as his queen piece glowed green slightly with a green magic circle appearing underneath her. I am, Velvet said calmly. All right then. Velvet Crow, I hereby reincarnate you to stand by my side as the queen of my peerage, he said as the queen piece slowly disappeared into Velvet's body. Once it fully disappeared, the magic circle followed not long after. Once it had disappeared, Naruto watched as Velvet sat up and looked at her hands. He could tell that she was trying to understand the new power that flowed through her body thanks to the queen piece. This power. She started as she felt as though she could take on a whole army and win without breaking a sweat. It's amazing, isn't it? Your queen piece has raised all of your abilities. As you are now, you might be able to go toe-to-toe with me when I use Murcielago, Naruto stated as he grabbed a pillow from off the bed. Where are you going? Velvet asked as she looked at the back of her king. To the lounge. I'll be sleeping on the couch. See you in the morning, Vel, he said, shortening her name. Velvet watched as he opened, but was stopped by the voice of Miyuki, who sat up and rubbed her eyes sleepily. Mama? she asked as Velvet smiled and pet the girl on her head. Hello, my little girl. How was your day with Ravel? She asked the girl as Naruto stood at the door and listened to the interaction between mother and daughter. It was so fun. We played games all day until we took a nap. She spoke happily as a smile appeared on the face of the two teens. Did you find Papa? The girl asked as both teens were now shocked. Papa. Naruto thought to himself. You mean Naruto, right, Miyu-chan? Velvet asked as the little girl nodded. Yep, she said before she saw said person at the door. Getting off the bed, she ran over to him before throwing herself at his legs. Naruto was knocked out of his thoughts as the little girl held onto his legs tightly. Looking down, he saw Miyuki's blue eyes staring into his own eyes. The smile that was on her face was one that Naruto always wanted to see every day with her. Miyuki's face shifted to one of concern as she felt liquid hit her forehead. Papa, are you okay? She asked as Naruto brought a hand to his emerald eye and wiped away a tear. I'm fine. Didn't think I still had these, he said as he picked the girl up and walked over to the bed. Miyuki was holding onto him tightly as her smile returned 5 times stronger than it did before. Though she was once again confused as Naruto placed her down before walking back to the door. Where are you going? She asked with her cheeks puffed in annoyance. Your mother and you can have the bed. I'm gonna be sleeping on the couch, he told her as she ran over to him again and grabbed his hand. She pulled with all the strength her little arms could muster as she dragged him over to the bed. Getting behind him, she pushed with all the strength that she could muster until Naruto was sitting on the bed. Panting slightly, she was smiling her usual smile. One that caused Naruto to let on his own, no matter how small it was. You will sleep here with Mama and I, she said as the two teens looked at each other before looking away with blushes on their faces. Miyu-chan, are you serious? Velvet asked, shocked at what her daughter wanted her to do. Yep. That's how families sleep, she said before climbing onto the bed and getting under the blankets. Naruto stared at Velvet as she stared back, a small blush on both of their faces. Their teenage minds not believing that this was an event about to happen. Naruto shrugged his shoulders before he got under the blankets of his king-sized bed. Velvet sighed before she did the same. The two teens simply looked at the roof before they felt Miyuki grab their hands. Looking at the girl in between them, they both laid down properly as Miyuki brought both of their arms to rest on top of her. Naruto's left hand being placed on top of Velvet's right. The blush seemed to increase for them before they closed their eyes. But not before they heard something that brought a smile to their faces. I love you, was what they heard from the girl in between them. We love you too, Miyuki, Velvet said, looking at the girl in between them. Naruto's face still had the unusual smile present as he nodded at his queen words before he shut his eyes. Miyuki, who had one eye open, stared at Naruto before she moved so she was closer to him. Velvet moved closer until they were all bunched together in the middle of the bed. Velvet on the right, her human arm laid on top of the blanket. Miyuki in the middle with her smile still present. And Naruto on the left, his left arm above the blankets as his hand rested on top of Velvet's own. They all fell asleep a few minutes later, the quiet sound of the others' breathing having lulled them all to sleep. Morning. Berseria. Naruto was awoken by the light of the sun as it shone through an open curtain. Sitting up, he felt a light weight on his lap. Looking down, he saw Miyuki had found her way onto his lap as they slept. Letting out a small laugh, he smiled before noticing that an arm was currently laying across his waist, going along Miyuki's back. Following the arm, he saw that Velvet had moved closer, probably when Miyuki had moved. Smiling at the peaceful face of his queen and his new daughter, Naruto moved both of them off of his body before grabbing some clothes from his drawers. Walking towards the bathroom, he noticed that it was a sunny day with no clouds in the sky. Looking back towards his room, he had an idea for them to spend the day together. 30 minutes later. After having a shower, Naruto walked out wearing a pair of orange shorts with an open orange and black jacket. He had no shirt on underneath. He walked down to his living room where he found his queen in her normal attire with a plate of scones in hand. She was sitting down in a chair before she placed the plate down and grabbed a book. Opening the book, she went to take a bit of one of her scones only for Naruto to lean in over her shoulder and take a bit for himself. She jumped back as he swallowed the food and didn't move from his place behind the chair she was sitting on. "Morning," he said as she glared at him. "Morning," was all she said before she grabbed another scone and bit into it. "So I was thinking." He started trailing off at the end. "Of what?" she asked. "Why don't we go to the beach? Spend a day together," he said as she thought about it. Nodding at his thought, she said that she would be back in a bit. Walking out the door, Naruto looked and saw that she had left her plate, which had 3 scones left, on the arm of the chair. Walking over, he grabbed it before walking over and opening the oven. Placing the plate inside, he walked over to a shelf he had and grabbed a book he enjoyed. Sitting down, he found where he left off and let the words engulf him in their story. He was brought out of his reading a few minutes later as Velvet came back in. She had a bag in her hand. "She woken up yet?" she asked in regards to their daughter. "Not yet," he replied as she walked to the stairs. "I'll wake her up." "Can you wake Revel-san?" she asked as he closed his book and stood to his feet. "Sure," he said, following after her. Eventually, he came to Ravel's room. Knocking on the door, he soon had it open as Ravel stepped out dressed in a maroon-colored dress with a sun hat on her head. "Good, you're up. Hope you brought some swimwear," he said as she nodded. "We going to the beach today?" she asked hopefully. So far she has just explored around Abel and the forests outside the town just to get used to the surroundings. Being able to go to the beach that the island nation had was something she wanted to do. "Yep," he said as he turned around and walked away. "We'll be leaving soon, so be ready," he said, only to have her run past him with a fully packed bag. "How the?" he asked, confused. "I've been ready to go to the beach since we first got here," she said before pulling out a second bag. "I've also taken the liberty to pack you some clothes as well," she said as he nodded at her. "Thank you for that, my lovely bishop," he said, getting a blush from her. And no problem," she stuttered as she turned around. "You should be grateful that I care about my reputation," she said, getting a raised brow. "How should I be grateful that you care about your reputation?" he asked, crossing his arms as he walked down to stand by her side. "Because that means I'll have to do anything you want me to in order to look like a wonderful piece," she stated with arrogance. "Be that as it may, I could just tell people that you were terrible," he said as she turned to him shocked. "Why would you do that?" she asked, shocked. Naruto gave her a smile before placing a hand on her head. "That way, you would stay as my lovely bishop forever and I wouldn't have to worry about someone taking you away from me," he said honestly as her blush increased. Their conversation was stopped as Velvet walked down with a still half-asleep Miyuki. Grabbing Velvet's bag, Naruto walked outside as Velvet walked in front of them, her being the native, leading them to the beach. After about 10 minutes of walking, Naruto was told to wait outside the changing rooms, seeing as he was already dressed for the beach. He stood around before he felt a sudden chill strike him. Looking up, his eyes widened as it had started snowing. Knocking on the door, Velvet walked out still fully dressed, looking at him confused till she noticed that it had started snowing. Closing the door, he heard the groans of disappointment come from Ravel as she was told to get dressed in her normal clothes. Once that was done, they all walked out as Naruto looked around, his blade and partner Murcielago, and his hand fully drawn. Reaching into her bag, Velvet pulled out her gauntlet and placed it on her right arm. They both looked forward as they heard footsteps coming from in front of them. "Would you look at this, Commander? Our target out in the open," a voice stated. "Why, yes. The only problem is the two in front of her," they heard another say as the two stepped in front of them. Standing in front of them was a tall, beautiful, and slender woman with long light blue hair and blue eyes. She wore a general's apparel with long sleeves, a blue scarf on her neck, and high-heeled boots. She also has a tattoo on her chest. Her blue eyes stared at the two teens as if they were her playthings. At her waist was a rapier. Standing next to her was a girl around their age. She has short black hair and a twin-tail style and black eyes. She wears a black sailor uniform and wears a red belt that has a red side skirt cover. She also wears red gauntlets. She had a sword at her side. She wears the outfit with long black socks and black shoes. The two stared at the two teens in front of them before the blue-haired woman stepped forward. "Hello, I am Miss Death. A mercenary hired by some interesting people to capture that little girl behind you too," the now named Miss Death said as she pointed to Miyuki, who was being held by Ravel. "Oh? And you think I'll just hand her over to you?" Naruto asked snidely as the woman shrugged. "I wasn't asking. I was letting you know what happens when I'm walking over your corpse," she said as she drew her rapier. Naruto, thinking quickly, opened a garganta behind Ravel and Miyuki, turning Ravel around and lightly pushing her through it with his foot. He closed it quickly before he turned back to his Death and her follower. "Well, it looks like you won't be capturing anyone now," he said as a look of annoyance came over her face. "You've managed to delay it. I'll just make you open up that portal after I'm through torturing you," she said, smiling as Naruto's face showed no emotion. "Velvet, I want you to take care of the girl," he said, looking over to the girl around their age only to see her missing. He felt his pesquisa go off. Turning around and raising his arm, the girl's sword had found itself stuck in Naruto's. Smiling a cocky smile, the girl was covered in a dark aura as she put more force into her swing. Naruto's eyes widened as he suddenly couldn't feel his left arm from below his wrist. Velvet moved and swung her blade at the girl, only for her to dodge the swing and move over to his Death's side. "Nice work, Kurome," making the blonde a cripple before the fight could begin. She praised the now-named Kurome, who smiled. "Thank you, Death-sama. It was easy to get around him while you kept him distracted," she said, only to hear Naruto let out a small laugh. Looking at his opponents from behind his queen, who was standing in front of him as a shield, he brought his left hand into view and showed that his hand had already regenerated. "I have to admit, that was interesting. You managed to fully get through my arrow and cut off my arm. That's a feat that not many have done." He praised them as he stepped in front of Velvet with Murcielago at his side. "Why don't we do some introductions?" he suggested, trying to buy time. "All right, I'll play along," His Death said as she stepped forward. "As I told you before, I am His Death. The girl at my side is Kurome," she said as the girl nodded her head. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he said as the ones in front of him drew their weapons. "This is Velvet Crow, my queen," he said as a hint of realization came across His Death's face. "So you and your small group are devils?" she asked as Naruto nodded. "Well then," she started before rushing Naruto and pushing him away from his queen. "Let's let our subordinates have fun while we face each other," she finished before kicking him into the surrounding trees. Velvet could only watch before she was forced to dodge an attack from Kurome. Don't let your guard down, for it might cost you your life, she said before rushing Velvet, who met her blow for blow with her gauntlet blade. Meanwhile, Naruto was dodging thrusts from his death, who was constantly trying to end him before he could fight back. Deflecting an attack, he moved quickly and kicked his death in her side and sent her flying into a tree. Backing away, he placed his blade in a ready position as she stood to her feet with a smile. I must say, when you switch to offense, your attacks can really pack a punch, she said as Naruto stared her down. Though it felt like a flea bite to me, she said as Naruto's eyes narrowed in annoyance. Is that so? He asked rhetorically. Guess I'll have to try harder. He finished as his death gave him a questioning look. Why are you doing this? She asked as Naruto charged her. Doing what? He asked as their blades met. Both jumped back before rushing forwards again. They dodged the offhanded attacks the other sent their way while having a slight talk. Protecting someone you don't even know, she said as she moved to the left and tried to pierce Naruto, who disappeared and reappeared behind her using Sonido. Miyuki is nothing but a scared girl, he shouted as she spun around and stopped his attack with a knife made of pure ice. But that's the thing. You haven't heard the truth, she said as she pushed him back before the ground around her was frozen. The truth? He asked as he jumped into a tree. Yes. The truth behind the connection of your dear queen and that little girl, she said as Naruto pointed his blade at her. Before I attack you, I want you to tell me what you mean, he said, getting some breath back. Miyuki Crow, as her name would be, isn't a normal little girl. I've been on this island doing research on my target since I was given the mission, and to see that little girl treated the way she was disgusted me greatly. Its death admitted as a look of shock appeared on Naruto's face. But I can see why, she said as she stared at Naruto, who only glared at her. And what reason would that be? He asked as he gathered his energy around him. You know the saying, don't you? Its death asked as she took off her hat. Humans fear what they don't understand and hate what they fear, she said, giving Naruto a slightly edited quote. And what does that have to do with anything? He asked as his sword disappeared. Its death raised a brow at the action before she continued. Everything. They hated the girl because they don't understand how she came to be, she said as Naruto looked on confused. And how did she came to be? He asked as he felt an energy spike in the distance. She was created as a lock, she answered as Naruto turned his attention back to her. That feeling you got just now, it was what is known by some as the awakening of calamity. Without the lock of calamity, the Lord of Calamity will rampage once more, she explained as a look of slight worry appeared on Naruto's face. You mean, he asked, having a hunch where she was going. Yep. Miyuki Crow was created by the world itself as the lock to prevent Velvet Crow, your queen, from going on a rampage and destroying the world, she explained with a dark smile as Naruto looked to where Velvet was. Damn it all, he said as he turned back to her. You splitting us up was all part of the plan, wasn't it? He accused her as his power leaked out. Not originally, but once I saw you send away the Lock of Calamity, I knew it was only a matter of time before the Lord of Calamity went out of control. I could tell when I saw her that the lock was what was keeping her from destroying everything. And now with the lock Satan knows where, it's only a matter of time before she destroys everything, its death said before she broke out in laughter. Ha ha ha, soon, all the weaklings will die and only those who are truly strong will survive. A true world order will form from the ashes, and for those who oppose the order, they will die thanks to the Lord of Calamity being our weapon. She continued to laugh until she felt a large surge of power. She stopped laughing and saw Naruto floating above the ground in his sacred gear form. His black wings fully spread out as the white cloak fluttered gently in the small wind. A scowl was found on the usually stoic boy's face as he formed a green javelin. So that's how you live, huh? A philosophy where the weak must die so that the strong can live on. He said, pausing as he let the thought sink into his head. His death rushed him with a glare as multiple spikes of ice formed at his feet. They all moved, getting ready to impale the boy as his death thrusted her now drawn rapier in an attempt to kill the boy. Naruto only looked on before he disappeared and reappeared below her. Spinning around as one of his wings were wrapped around him, he flung it open, sending her into the arm from the attack. Appearing above her, he swung down with all his might, sending her hurtling back to the ground, crashing in the now destroyed, frozen ground. He landed beside her before stomping on her chest. The action caused her to get sent into the ground more as a zero formed at his fingertips. If that's the philosophy you live with, then by all rights, I should kill you here and now, he said as his death closed her eyes, accepting her fate. Only to feel Naruto take his foot off of her chest and start walking back to where his queen was as he turned back to normal. His death brought herself to her feet as she stared at the teen who continued to walk away. He could have ended her, yet he let live. What are you doing? She screamed in confusion as Naruto stopped and looked over his shoulder at her. Letting you live. You lost the battle, there isn't a need to kill you. Nor do I want to kill you, he said before turning back and walking on ahead. Find another way to live. Living the way you are now, all it'll lead to is death, he added before she stopped him again. A group of fallen angels, she said as he turned to face her. This time, confusion written clearly on his face. What do you mean? He asked. The people who hired me and Kurom. It was a group of rogue fallen angels. They knew of the Lord of Calamity and her lot. They are stationed in an old abandoned building to the north, she said as Naruto raised a brow. Why are you telling me this? He asked in a rush as he felt another spike of energy. Because of what you said. If I continue to live by that philosophy, then all I'll get is death, she said sadly as she cradled what she felt was a broken rib. I haven't lived my life enough to let myself die, she finished as Naruto let out a small smirk before a notepad appeared in his hand. Writing on it, he walked back over to her and gave her the page he had written on. Turning around, he started walking quickly as his death looked at the note. On it was an address and under it the words, I have a proposition for you. Meet me at this address tomorrow. Looking at the retreating form of the blonde, she let a small smile appear. Naruto was quickly moving through the trees until he came to where he left Velvet. Looking around, he saw craters and smoke flowing out from them. Looking around, he found Kurom laying against a tree as blood leaked from her mouth. He looked across from her and saw Velvet covered in a red and black aura. Moving closer, Naruto stopped in front of her and grabbed her demonic arm. The clawed fingers dug into his arm as he grunted, feeling some of her dark energy flow into his body while she stole his own. Calm yourself, Velvet, he said as she growled at him. Why should I? These pieces of shit want to take our daughter from us. I won't allow that. I'll kill them before they can even touch her, she snarled in anger as Naruto held her arm tighter as the claws dug into his skin more. He grunted as a small smoke trail started from his arm as he tried to heal the damage that was constantly being made. Look at her, Velvet, he urged as the girl looked towards the scared teen in front of her. She's terrified of you. She wouldn't be able to fight back. Don't waste your time or energy, he said as she started to calm down as Kurom could only wonder how he managed to calm her. If they try anything, she started as Naruto cut her off. They won't. In fact, I think we could use their help, he said as she looked at him. With what? She asked, confused and angry. Getting payback against the ones who tried to take Miyuki from us. They are under orders from others. Plus his death isn't in any condition to fight. They won't be a problem, he said as she took her claws out of his arm. Opening a garganta, he told her to take a few seconds to compose herself while he went and talked with Kuron. Walking over to the scared teen, he saw as she tried to back away in fear. Don't be scared. I'm not going to hurt you, he said as she was hesitant to trust him. Listen, when you meet up with his death, she'll tell you about a meeting. Go with her, he said as she looked at him with fear in her eyes. Why should I believe you? She asked as Naruto looked at her. Because I'm the reason you're still breathing, he said before walking to his queen who was waiting for him. Kuron watched as they both walked into the portal before she saw it close. Looking to the sky, she watched as it cleared up and a light shined on her. Hearing noise beside her, she watched as his death sat down next to her and showed her the note. We might have a new employer. She laughed as Kuron closed her eyes. I need a nap, she said as his death laughed before they both stood to their feet and walked to the nearest hospital. ORC club room. The peerage of Rias Grimory were all assembled as an awkward silence filled the room. Before it was interrupted by Issei as he walked through the door. Before he could say anything, everyone was shocked to see a garganta open above him and for Ravel to fall through and land on the privet. Her knees met the back of his head. When she got her bearings, she quickly stood up and looked at everyone in the room. Miyuki was hiding behind her as Akino walked over. Ravel-sama, what are you doing here? She asked as Ravel looked at her. That idiot booted me through the garganta when he saw that a fight was about to start, she said, annoyed as Akino noticed the small girl behind. Who is that adorable little thing? She asked as Ravel blinked. I'm Miyuki Crow, she said shyly as she continued to hide behind Ravel. Akino got down on her knees and smiled kindly at the girl as Miyuki looked away. Hello Miyuki-chan. I'm Akino Himejima. But you can just call me Akino Nisama, she said gently as Miyuki looked at her. Nice to meet you Akino Nisama, she said as she continued to hide behind Ravel. Akino smiled before looking over to Kaneko. She saw this and sighed heavily before handing Akino a lollipop. Akino thanked her and promised to pay her back before she turned back to Miyuki. Do you want this candy? She asked gently as Miyuki stared at Ravel, who nodded. Go on. She's a nice lady, she said as Miyuki walked out from behind Ravel and reached for the lollipop. Akino gave the young girl the lollipop, which she instantly placed in her mouth, before she smiled at the girl. Everyone who was in the room stared at the young girl who smiled back at Akino. Small time skip. Ravel and Miyuki had getting to know the people of Naruto's former peerage for the past half an hour. Ravel saw as to why Naruto kept most of them dear to him. Though she would lightly glare at Rias out of the corner of her eye, but she would also thank her at the same time. If she didn't screw up the way she did, then Naruto never would have left and she wouldn't be his bishop. Miyuki, on the other hand, was happy spending time with others that she started to see as her family. Rias, having enough of waiting around and saying nothing, stood up to speak only to be cut off as they all heard the sound of the garganta open. Looking back over to the door, they watched as Velvet jumped out of the garganta and instantly looked around for Miyuki. Mama, she called as the others who looked at Velvet, who smiled and walked over to her. Miyuki got off the couch she was on, next to Kaneko, and went and hugged her mother, who flinched and the contact. Miyuki pulled away and looked worried at how her mother flinched. Looking up, she saw Velvet holding her side as some blood leaked out. Are you okay? Miyuki asked, afraid. Velvet smiled at her and rubbed her head with her non-bloodied hand. I'll be fine. I've been through worse, she said as the others heard Issei, who was still unconscious, groan in pain. Looking over, a smile came to all their faces as Naruto was standing there, his foot lodged somewhere firmly between Issei's lungs and stomach. His face had a small smile as he saw everyone else, but it faded when his eyes met Rias's. Stepping off the perv, he stepped forwards as Asia noticed that he had blood flowing from multiple holes in his right arm. She rushed over to him only for him to stop her. "Heal Velvet first," he said as she nodded before moving to the Therian's side and using her sacred gear to heal any wounds on her body. Naruto smiled at how Asia was willing to help someone, but laughed slightly as Velvet looked uncomfortable at how eager Asia was to help her. Akino stood to her feet and walked over to the other blonde in the room, besides Kiba, and stopped in front of him. Naruto's gaze met her own as he saw something in her eyes that he couldn't place. He was caught off guard as she brought him in for a tight hug. Pulling away, she smiled at how he hadn't changed, though she was still worried about the blood that was dripping from his arm. Rias, walking over, stood in front of him and all he could see was the regret held within her eyes. Velvet, seeing this, stood up and made her way over to the redhead, quickly moved in front of her as she tried to take another step forward. "Get out of my way," she said gently as Velvet's left arm came undone. "Why should I?" Velvet asked as she brought her left arm up. "I need to talk with Naruto," she said as Velvet didn't move. "Then talk, I don't need to move," Velvet said stubbornly as Miyuki walked over to Naruto and grabbed his leg. Naruto smiled at her as he gently patted her head as Rias glared at Velvet. "This doesn't concern you," she said as Velvet gave her signature cocky smirk. "It concerns my king," she said as Rias stepped back slightly as Velvet took a step forward. Naruto, seeing where this was going to stop them only for Asia to punch him in the arm where the blood was leaking. He looked at his little sister as she started to heal the holes that were located in his bicep. "She needs to hear it from someone else, to show that you have moved on," he heard her say as he watched as Rias was backed against the wall by Velvet. "But just because you moved on doesn't mean that you can stop visiting us," she continued once she was finished. "I'll try and visit more," he said as he picked up Miyuki. "So you're his queen, so what?" Rias said, trying to act tough as Velvet stared her in the eye. "He was my knight first," she said as Velvet's eyes widened. "So you're the one, his former king. I have to thank you," Velvet said as she brought her arm up to her side to rest on her hip. "For what?" Rias asked, confused. "For screwing up so badly with him. If you hadn't have done that, then Naruto would have never come to our home and made me his queen," Velvet said as she walked back over to Naruto, who stood next to the still open garganta. "Maybe next time, look at the diamond in the rough and not the gold in the open, you foolish girl," she said, pushing Naruto through the garganta as Ravel followed after him. Before she went through, though, Velvet turned to the rest of the peerage. "Thank you all for looking out for Naruto while he was part of this failure's peerage. Don't worry, I'll make sure that he'll visit. We just got a lot of things to do at our home," she said before turning back and walking into the garganta. "Oh, and Red," she said, getting Rias's attention. "The name's Velvet Crow. Keep that in your mind as you remember that Naruto will never belong to you again," she said before it closed. Though Velvet turned before it closed and her eyes had changed to a dark shade of red as she was covered in a black and red-colored aura. Those red eyes were gonna haunt her dreams as Rias realized that what Velvet said was true. Because she was so caught up in her greed, so drawn into the fact that Issei's powers had awakened and his sacred gear was the hold of the Welsh dragon, Drake. She never saw the true power that Naruto held within himself. Gritting her teeth in anger, she burned the name into her head. Velvet Crow, she thought in anger. "I'll show you. He still cares, I just need to dig deep into his heart to show you. And once I do, you'll realize that he belongs to me." She continued to think, too caught up in her anger to realize that Velvet is not someone to take lightly. End. /N, holy shit. 13k plus words with these author notes. Again, this story seems to be the one that has the most words in a single chapter. I guess because I can go wild with the Peerage Collection arc. Now some of you will be complaining how I didn't make the fight between Naruto and his death epic or show the Velvet vs. Kurome fight. But they were mainly there to explain as to why I had Miyuki in the story. I am using her as a way to limit how much power Velvet can now put out. I did say that she could stand up against Naruto and Murcielago. Well, with her power up thanks to being a queen, and she can get stronger as she devours others, she will be able to give Naruto a very good run for his money. Now in this story, Naruto can defeat most enemies with ease, but when it comes to godly tier bad guys, he will get his ass handed to him. He can't stand up against Ophis in a fight as he is. As he gets stronger though, he will be close that gap. Also, I hope some of you like the reason I came up with for Rias to ignore Naruto. I used the fact that all devils were attracted to power thanks to the sin of greed. With how it was. Issei, after first awakening his sacred gear when fighting Rainier, was constantly releasing energy that it was easier for him to be sensed or found because the output of his sacred gear alone. Meanwhile, Naruto's powers were sealed. He could use the techniques of an Arrancar, but he wasn't able to use his sacred gear's power as it was still sealed away. As such, Rias's devil nature was drawing her more to Issei rather than Naruto, whose power was sealed away and only appeared as a sword. He had his abilities, but they aren't as strong as they will be once he fully masters his powers. Now before people say stuff like, but Bleach characters can beat anyone no problem. Dumb asses. I'm nerfing him for the story itself. I'm not gonna start with a OP as hell character who can make people piss themselves just by looking. I'm gonna start with a weaker version and build him up. Bring everyone along for the ride as he eventually becomes a man who can protect those close to him. That's how I write my stories. I'm just a fan of the whole underdog cliché. Sure, I'll have some where Naruto is all-powerful and has people who can't even touch, but I'll also have times when he is defeated by the most simple things. A good offensive strategy is a good defensive strategy. And yes, I know I changed the quote, but you get the general idea. Anyway, it is getting late over here in NZ. So this is me for the night. Oh, also you all better be ready for the New Year's gift I'm writing. Yes, it's the Naruto and RWBY story, Beacon's Extending Blade. I hope you all enjoy it, and yes, it's using a Konoha-born Naruto. So shadow clones, Rasengan and other things that are used in canon will be at Naruto's disposal. He won't have a semblance or aura, but Ashpin will allow him to fight in the Vital Festival because of who Naruto is connected with. Also, yeah, I think this is a good place to place this. King, Naruto Uzumaki. Queen, Velvet Crow. Rook, Mutated Rook. Bishop, Ravel Phoenix. Mutated Bishop. Pawn x4. Pawn x4. Knight. Knight. Chapter 4 Old Grudges. /N. In this chapter, we will be given small glances at the rest of Naruto's future peerage. And maybe even have some of them recruited. And we'll even get a glance into Naruto's past. Miyuki, be a dear. Miyuki, the author owns nothing. Naruto, Bleach, and High School DxD are all owned by their respective creators. /N, you heard her. Let's go. Also, this is the third time I reposted this chapter. For some reason it wouldn't register that I had posted it. Ranbu no Melody. Berseria Cliffside, 6 a.m. Naruto was currently sitting on the edge of a cliff with a large drop into the roaring ocean below. The water thrashed against the rocks before throwing it up. He sat there as he stared off into the distance, wanting to catch the beauty of when dawn finally broke with his own eyes. His right eye had a special ability in which whatever it had seen would never be forgotten. What this eye sees will forever be trapped within the sight of this eye. He thought to himself as he looked to his blade which laid upon the grass next to him. But what this eye cannot see does not exist to me. He continued as he thought back on his past. His time in the orphanage, to the reason behind him leaving and the one thing he would always remember. His mother's words to him and the emotions within her eyes when she said it. Small flashback. Naruto, at the age of 10, was currently walking away from the orphanage which he called home before he heard something that made him stop. Turning, his eyes widened as the nun who was basically a mother to him stood at the entrance. A bandage over her right eye as tears fell from the left. He looked away slightly before she walked over to him. When she stood in front of him, she brought him into a hug. One filled with the love of a mother, something he wanted for all his life. It's not your fault, she said as he looked into her one brown eye. But he tried to protest only to be cut off. But nothing, you did nothing wrong. You protected your mother, and I couldn't be more proud of you, she said as a tear formed in Naruto's blue eye. There we go, she said before holding him tighter. You're only human, dear, things like this will happen. It's how the world works, but I know that you will come out of it a stronger man, she said as he nodded as the tear trailed down the right side of his face. I will become as strong as possible in order to keep you safe, he said as he returned the hug. I know you will. You my child after all. I will always love you, no matter what. Naruto, she said as his eyes widened even more before he smiled. I love you too, Ka-chan, he said before they broke their hug and he walked off. Flashback end. I know the true love of a mother, the pain of betrayal, the sting of death, and the need to protect. All of these things I have experienced, all of them I know, he thought to himself as he stood to his feet. I also know the truth. Despair is nothing, I will overcome my curse. And I will become stronger because of it, he thought with determination in his eyes as Murcielago heard his thoughts. You can do it, partner. Don't let it control your life is yours to control, Murcielago thought as he trusted his partner. Looking towards the distance once more, Naruto allowed a smile to come across his face as he thought on his current peerage members. Turning away from the cliff, he started walking away, though he stopped and watched as he saw the sun rising in the distance. Everyone, once I gather my peerage, I will return. Zenobia, should we meet again, I hope you can understand, he thought to himself before returning to his home. Meanwhile, the clanging of blades could be heard as a blue-haired teen with a green fringe battled an older man. In her hands was a large sword, one of the holy weapons of the church. Excalibur Destruction. She was panting as the man sheathed the two blades he was using. Time we take a break, he said with an Irish as she looked annoyed. I can't take any more breaks. I must get stronger, she said as the man smiled. For the boys and lass? He asked smiling. The girl looked away with a small blush on her face. Lass, it's good you're trying to get stronger for someone else's sake, but what will you do when you find the boy? You know what happened to him, the man said as she nodded. I remember you telling me. He was thrown out for false accusations, she said, gripping her blade tightly. A lie it was, he said as she glared at him. You lied, she said, glaring at him. To keep you safe. If you had known, then you would have gone out of your way to attack the people who got rid of him, he said as she looked away. When we found out, you let your anger control your actions, he said as she started glaring at the ground. And what was I supposed to do? She shouted as she stared at the priest. Tell me, Father Anderson, she screamed as the man, Anderson, sighed. Have patience and get stronger. I know how you're feeling, lass. I quite enjoyed the young lad when I first met him," he said, remembering the blond boy he grew attached to. "How much more training do I need to do?" she asked. "Not much more. You're doing quite well as you are now. No doubt you and Irina will be sent to investigate Kuo," he said as she raised a brow. "Why is that?" she asked as he gave her a confused look. "Have you not heard that the Excalibur fragments have been stolen?" he asked as she looked away embarrassed. "What goes on inside that head of yours?" he asked as she blushed. "Girl stuff," she replied as he nodded. "Right. Anyway, time for you to rest, then I'll explain the reason you are going to Kuo soon. And listen this time, Zenobia," he said as she nodded. The blue-haired girl walked over to stand next to the blonde-haired priest as he patted her on her head. "You've improved since your first day here. Naruto would be proud," Anderson told her as she smiled. "When I see him, I'm gonna make him pay for making me worry," she said. Anderson only laughed as he continued to walk away with Zenobia following. Back with Naruto. Naruto was currently walking around looking for something to make his small group when he heard a cough come from behind him. Turning around, he pointed a finger towards the person only to see his death and Kuron, both having bandages covering some of their body. Lowering his finger, he watched as they walked closer till they stood by his side. "I thought we were to meet at your place," Kuron said as she looked towards Naruto. "We will. I just need to grab some things for my peerage," he said as they stopped at a vendor and he grabbed a spring onion. "You cook for your peerage?" she asked as Naruto nodded. "Yep. My queen is a cook as well. She makes a decent scone, that's for sure," he said before grabbing some flour. "That's good. I like eating food," she said as she pulled out a bag and started snacking on biscuits. Once Naruto was done, he returned to his home with his death following a smile on her face while Kuron was eating her biscuits. He opened the door and walked into the kitchen and placed the food down. Once he had done that, he walked into the living room to find Velvet glaring at his death as Miyuki was within her lap. Ravel sat next to her, ready to step in and protect her. He walked over before he sat down in between them. Turning to Velvet, he nodded slightly as her glare lessened, but still remained. "Death, what can you tell us of the fallen angels that are based here?" he asked as he glanced at her. "Nothing much, unfortunately, just that they are up at the church. And there is only one fallen angel. He has a few corrupt priests with him, but other than that it won't be too hard to take them down," she said as Naruto closed his eyes thinking it over. "So what? If they wanted Miyuki, they should have tried taking her. I've been getting hungry lately," Velvet said as the glare was still in place. "Calm down, Velvet. We will handle them soon," Naruto said calmly as Velvet's glare was turned to him. "How can you tell me to calm down when those people sitting in front of me tried kidnapping my daughter?" Velvet asked, enraged as Naruto glanced at her. "They were simply following their contract. As such, they are not to blame," Naruto said as Ravel gave him a look. Turning to his bishop, he nodded slightly as Ravel walked off as Naruto turned back towards his death and Kuron. "For tonight you will be on our side, acting as a double agent. You return back to the church while the three of us follow, and when the fallen least expects it, we ambush him," Naruto suggested as Ravel returned with a chess set. Death looked towards Naruto, who simply gave her a blank stare while Kuron raised a brow in confusion. Velvet looked towards the pieces before she rounded on Naruto. "You can't be serious?" she asked as Naruto sighed. "Completely. With his Death's abilities with her rapier and her ice magic, I think she would be a good rook. She has the speed and she does tend to fight in close combat. Whereas Kuron would be a decent pawn," She managed to cut through my arrow and cut my arm off. That speaks wonders of her abilities. Naruto explained as Velvet's glare lightened. You better know what you're doing, she said as Naruto nodded. Don't worry about it. If they try anything, I will show them my power, he said as he glared at his death and Kuron. Kuron was taken back by the glare Naruto sent in their direction. Not expecting someone who seemed to have no emotions suddenly give her a glare filled with hatred. She could just feel the power that he hid away, as though she was being forced beneath the waves of the ocean itself. His death, however, smiled at the fact that Naruto didn't lie about his intentions should they betray him. Nodding, she looked towards him before she turned her attention to Velvet. You have nothing to worry about, Velvet-san. We will do nothing to your daughter. But we do have one condition, she said as her smile widened. And that condition is? Velvet asked as Ravel placed the set down in front of them. We join your peerage. We are getting quite tired of running around and taking the random odd jobs. So maybe joining a peerage will give us a place to properly come home, she said as Velvet turned to Naruto. What do you think? Velvet asked as Naruto closed his eyes in thought. Thinking it over, he opened his eyes and turned his attention back to his death and Kuron. I'll consider it. But I will properly decide after we take out the fallen here. Besides, it gives me time to see if you're worth it or not, he said as he stood to his feet. I know about your skill with a rapier and your ability to control ice. It could be very handy in certain situations, he said before he turned to look at Kuron. While I know nothing about you, Kuron-san, he said as Kuron nodded. My blade is my representative of my sacred gear, she said as Naruto raised a brow. And is there anything else? He asked as she nodded. That aura that appeared around me when I cut off your arm is thanks to it, she continued while munching on a cookie. You'll find out more tonight, she finished as Naruto nodded. All right then, he said simply before looking towards Velvet. They are on our side now. You don't have to trust them yet, he said as he walked into the kitchen with Velvet staring at his death and Kuron. You cross us, I will not hesitate to eat you, she said before standing up and walking off. She's not serious, right? Kuron asked, slightly scared. Who knows, Kuron-chan? All I know is that hell have no fury like an angry mother, his death said, laughing slightly as Miyuki was peeking at them from around the corner. His death saw her before she put a gentle smile on her face before she walked over and knelt down. You're the mean lady from the other day, she said as his death's smile disappeared. Are you here to take me away from Mama and Papa? Miyuki asked as it seemed like she was ready to run. No, young one. I'm not gonna break up your family. In fact, I want to join it and keep you safe, his death explained as her smile returned. Miyuki still looked suspicious of her before she backed away slightly. How can I know you're not lying? Miyuki asked as Naruto appeared behind her. Because if she is lying, Papa is gonna be annoyed, he said as Miyuki ran and hid behind his leg as a frown was locked on his face. Oh, I haven't seen you annoyed? His death asked, teasing him. My tolerance is very high, but it can only be pushed so far, he answered. Move into the kitchen, I've made lunch, he said before picking Miyuki up and walked to the kitchen as his death followed him after letting Kuron know. Once they entered the dining room, they saw a large table located in the middle of the room. Looking around, his death saw a rune on the wall. Raising a brow, she walked and inspected it while Kuron made her way to the table. Ravel noticed that his death's attention was on the rune, smiled smugly. Impressed? She asked with a tone filled with smugness. Very. I didn't think anyone in this bunch of misfits knew how to use runes to manipulate the space of an area, she said as Ravel looked shocked. How did you? She tried to ask only for his death to smile. Know about the rune? His death asked rhetorically. You're not the first person I've encountered that uses them. She said as Ravel looked down. Don't worry about it, Ravel, you're still very useful. Naruto said as he placed Miyuki down on a chair before Velvet walked in with bowls of food. Yeah, you have a certain charm about you that we enjoy. Plus you have your fire abilities and your experience from your previous peerage. She said as Ravel felt her ego swell. Well then, I guess you are right. I am a pretty awesome piece in this peerage. She said as Naruto let a smile grace his features. There's the thunder of the peerage. He said jokingly as Ravel blushed. Quiet baka. She screamed as Velvet laughed. His death smiled at the interactions of what seemed to be a family instead of a high-class devil and his peerage. Looking towards Kurom, she saw a smile on the girl's face as she stared at the group. Once all the food had been eaten and the dishes had been cleaned, Naruto had just put Miyuki to bed before he felt a magic circle appear behind him. Gathering his energy to his hand, it formed his usual javelin as he stood ready in case they were going to attack him. Turning slightly, he saw his king standing there with her usual blank facade. His javelin disappeared as Miyuki opened an eye to see Graphia there. Who is that woman? She thought as Naruto bowed. What are you doing here, Graphia-sama? He asked as Graphia's blank expression disappeared and was replaced with a small smile. I came to visit my only piece and I find him putting a little girl to sleep. She said as Naruto looked towards Miyuki slightly. Graphia-sama, I have a favor to ask you. Naruto said as she raised a brow. What is it? She questioned as Naruto's gaze was locked onto Miyuki. My peerage and a potential 2 others are going to be investigating the nearby church to clear it of the fallen inhabiting it. He explained as she nodded slightly. I feel as though they might attempt some form of underhanded tactics and try and get Miyuki while I am gone. So please look after her until we returned. He finished with a bow as Graphia closed her eyes and thought. I will do it. Just try and come back safe. She said as Naruto nodded before he walked out of the room. Don't worry about me. He said as he closed the door before he left the house. Once outside, he found his peerage standing in front of the door waiting for him, all ready for battle. Reaching a hand out, his sword appeared as he walked in front of them all before he glanced at his death. Lead the way. He said as his death walked ahead with Kurom at her side. Looking towards Velvet and Ravel, he nodded before following after the others with his queen and bishop following him. Eventually, after a long walk out of town, Naruto and his group found themselves standing outside of a church. Looking at his group, he raised his right hand as a red static ring appeared around it before the door was blown away. Lowering his hand, he walked into the church with his group following. When they entered it, they found someone standing in the middle of the church looking at a broken glass window with a picture of Jesus on it. Don't know what they are called really. My, it has been some time since I last saw you, boy. The fallen said as he turned around showing a fierce glare. He had a red and black eye for his right and a blue and black eye for his right. The black part is the whites of his eyes. Short, spiky gray hair was atop his head as Naruto slightly unsheathed his blade. Eurus, Big Mono. Naruto said as the fallen laughed. Quiet, monster. Is that really any way to treat me after not seeing me for so long? He asked teasingly as Naruto pulled his sword out completely. You ruined my life. Separated me from my mother. Naruto said as a glare appeared on his face. You hurt her. He finished as his energy started leaking out. Oh yes, the blonde bimbo. He said, ignoring the boy's glare. How is the bitch now? He asked, laughing. Enjoying the facial makeover I gave her. He continued as Naruto lowered his sword. She's fine. Nothing I couldn't fix. He answered simply before he noticed that they were surrounded. Not like it matters. I think once I'm done here, I'll pay your home a little visit and finish what I started back then. He said, licking his lips as his eyes landed on Velvet and Ravel. After savoring these delightful treats thoroughly, he ended as Ravel shivered and covered herself while Velvet only glared at him. No one noticed Naruto's grip on his blade tightened to the point where blood started to leak from his hand, though the grip loosened as he raised his blade once again. I'll make you regret everything you've ever done, he stated as the fallen only laughed. You'll make me regret everything I've done? Don't make me laugh, boy. I am the fallen angel Orneas. You can't defeat me, he said as Naruto's energy flooded the room. Onslaught Murcielago. His voice echoed out as Orneas backed away slightly in fear when the energy disappeared. What the hell is that form? He asked as Naruto's skin peeled slightly as his eyes changed to their golden color. This is the power of my sacred gear. But you're about to see more of it. This is for my mother, Naruto said as a glare appeared fiercer than before as he was covered in his energy again. His death and the others, bar Ravel, were shocked when it faded, leaving Naruto in his balance breaker. I will admit, he started as his wings stretched out completely. You're the first person to actually make me angry, Naruto explained as he disappeared and reappeared behind Orneas with one of his wings curled. It flung it fiercely and sent Orneas outside as he simply stood on the air as it was a proper platform, turning his attention to his group as the moon was behind him. He gave them a blank stare as it unnerved others while Velvet understood what was being said. Her left arm unwrapped itself as she turned to one of Orneas's followers. You're gonna pay for trying to take my daughter away, she growled before charging them as Ravel's wings appeared as fire burned in her hands. I got your back, Velvet, she said as she blasted a couple of runners with fireballs, reducing them to ash. Naruto stared at the two of them before his attention went towards Orneas, who had just flown back into the church, his 3 sets of wings fully on display. His death watched as they stared each other before what looked like a light spear appeared in Naruto's hand. By my word, you will die here, he said before Orneas charged him with a light spear of his own. She turned her attention to Kurom, who was watching as Velvet tore through Orneas' followers like they were nothing while Ravel covered her. Shall we help our new friend Kurom-chan? His death asked as she pulled out her rapier. Kurom unsheathed her sword and pointed at the sky as she turned to the closest set of followers. You're all gonna make some fine toys for me, she said before rushing them with his death following her. Meanwhile, Naruto was watching them out of the corner of his eye before he turned his attention back to the fallen in front of him. Orneas came rushing towards him, wildly swinging his spear. Naruto scoffed before he disappeared using Sonido. Orneas stopped only to spin around as Naruto's wing flung him away yet again. Where Orneas flew from the attack, Naruto would be waiting with his wing folded again just to bat him away and do it all over again. Eventually he got bored and swung upwards, sending Orneas to the sky before he appeared above him. Orneas opened his eyes. The pain from being used as a pinball stopped only to see Naruto above him, a finger aimed towards him. Die, Ciro Oscuras, Naruto said before Orneas was enveloped in his attack. The attack struck the ground as the remaining followers were cornered by a very pissed off Velvet. She raised her demonic hand and swung as hard as she could, tearing the throats of them out as she calmed down. Licking the blood that landed near her mouth, she looked towards the crater formed from Orneas' body as Naruto lowered himself to the ground. Orneas stood to his feet and tried to form another light spear, only for Naruto to be standing next to him holding his wrists. You can't win against me, he said before he broke both of Orneas' wrists. Let me tell you something, Orneas, the moment I looked at you, I knew I was gonna win, Naruto said as Orneas glared at him. And how do you know that, scum? Orneas screamed enraged at the young boy. Because I couldn't see myself losing to such a pathetic being like yourself. Naruto said as he returned to normal and turned around with his hands in his pockets. Whatever this eye can see is forever trapped within its sight. I saw the real you that day and I knew I would need to get rid of you in the future. Naruto said, taking a slight pause. But what this eye of mine cannot see simply does not exist. He finished as Ornia's glare only increased. I'll kill you. Once my arms heal, I'll slaughter you and rape all those close to you. Especially the blue-haired girl Zenobia. He screamed with a deranged smile as Naruto turned to him with a blank expression. What was that? Naruto asked as no one saw the true emotion behind his emotionless mask. You heard me. Maybe I'll even take your dear mother. You stopped me before I could continue, so maybe I will finish the job. He screamed again as drool ran down his chin. Naruto faced him completely as he walked towards Ornia's and stood in front of him before raising his hand. Energy violently gathered within the palm of his hand as Velvet's demonic arm glowed slightly. Red lighting sparked lightly as a black orb with a red core formed within Naruto's hand. This is for everything you have done to me. To my mother. He said, pulling his arm back. Farewell, monster. Naruto continued throwing his arm forward as the attack collided with Ornia's face. Saigai Rasengan. He shouted as the orb exploded, sending rubble everywhere. Calamity Rasengan. The area in front of Naruto was completely destroyed, and Ornia's had been reduced to nothing. The power of the attack combined with its explosive nature due to Naruto's lack of concentration made the attack very devastating. Though it did have a backlash. Naruto's arm that held the attack suffered. Skin had been peeled away and rotation burns continued further up his arm. But his hand and wrist were missing. The power behind the attack seemed to have affected himself and caused his hand to be destroyed in the process. He backed away as his regeneration kicked in. The damage to his skin being taken care of until his hand and wrist grew back. Once that was done, Velvet's arm stopped glowing as Naruto stared at the crater in the middle of the church. Mother, thank you for giving me strength. He thought to himself as a smile came across his face. Turning to his death and Kuron, he gave them a blank stare as his death gave him a smile. We were meant to ambush him. And yet he knew of our arrival and had his men ready to surround us. Naruto started slowly. Did you let him know that we were coming? He asked calmly as Velvet turned to the two with a glare. Yes. I did. As Death said, her smile still present. You bitch. Velvet screamed as Naruto stepped forward. Why did you let him know we were coming? Naruto asked confused. When we fought before, I could tell that you were holding back. You had multiple chances to kill me, and your speed aided you in that little factor as well. She started shrugging slightly. So I knew that you could kill him no matter what. She finished as Naruto looked at the crater. Thank you then. Naruto said, confusing everyone. I find it strange how he didn't transform or have any other way to defend himself. But still, thanks to you, I was able to clear my head and deal with some old problems. He said as he closed his eyes. Though something strange occurred. When his eyes were closed, he found himself staring at a picture of him and Zenobia. He watched as a feminine hand traced his face before his vision faded away. Opening his eyes, he placed his hand over his left eye. His face showed confusion before he wrote it off as nothing. Let's go home. I can perform the ceremony. Though, if you betray my trust again, it's death. He trailed off as he pointed a finger towards her. You'll suffer the same fate as Ornia's. I wish for my peerage to trust one another, not have to watch out in case they will be stabbed in the back. He continued as his death nodded. Don't worry, I won't betray your trust again. If something comes up, I will talk with you and your queen. She said, smiling as Naruto nodded. What about you, Kurom? Naruto asked. Meh, where's death goes I go. So let's do this, Naruto-sama, she said, shrugging as Naruto nodded. He turned to face the door and walked on ahead. Velvet sent a glare towards them while Ravel simply followed after her king. As death followed after them shortly as Kurom fell into pace behind them. They eventually arrived at Naruto's house to find Graphia sitting on a couch with Miyuki sleeping in her lap. Who are you? Velvet asked as Graphia turned to their group. So this is your peerage. I am quite impressed, she said, smiling as Naruto nodded. Thank you, Graphia-sama, Naruto said, bowing as Velvet turned to him. Who is this Naruto? Velvet asked, confused and slightly worried for Miyuki. She's Graphia Lucifuge. I represent her queen within her peerage, he explained as Velvet looked at her. I must thank you for looking after Naruto. He seems to have changed slightly, she commented, smiling. In what way? Naruto asked, confused. Your emotions are showing more. You're dropping the mask you've hidden behind for so long, she said as his eyes widened. How long have you known? He asked, shocked at how she knew about his mask. Since I first met you. You may be able to hide the emotions on your face, but not in your eyes, she said as Velvet nodded. She's right, you know, she said as Naruto turned to her. You tend to keep an emotionless face most of the time, but your eyes always showed the emotion, she finished as Naruto sighed. You guys are the few to see through that thing, he said with his eyes closed. Moving on, what do you need, Graphia-sama? He asked, opening his eyes. There seems to be a problem with the vampires and the yokai. They came to us devils asking for help. The vampires, that is, she said calmly. Naruto nodded. Strange, I thought vampires liked dealing with their problems by themselves, as Death said as Velvet thumbed her chin in thought. They must have asked for our help, seeing as we are neutral in the situation. That way we won't be biased for anything, Velvet theorized as Graphia nodded. Smart group. Yes, the vampires wanted the devils there as a neutral party, Graphia said as Naruto nodded. So you wanted me and my peerage to go and represent the devils, Naruto said as Graphia nodded. Correct. You will be there to find out what happened and try and get both sides compromised without ant casualties, she said as Naruto nodded. All right then. My guess is that you'll bring us to the vampires tomorrow, Naruto stated instead of asking. That is correct, Graphia said as she picked Miyuki up. What are you doing? Velvet asked. I'm going to put Miyuki into her bed and then return to my home. Don't worry, Velvet, I wouldn't bring harm to my queen's peerage, she said before walking off. Well, guess I should turn you two into devils. Though, we will need a bigger house soon, he said as he brought out his mutated rook and two of his pawns. End. So I will end this here. I know it's smaller than usual, but I feel as though I could do better if I did shorter chapters for this story. Now for some who may be confused with the conversation between his death and Naruto. First was Naruto having an ideal thought with his death and Kurom placement. The second part was his death telling him she wanted to be part of the peerage. Sorry if that part was confusing. Anyway, hope you enjoy. Later.